to order the Keizer Long Range Planning Task Force. It is Monday, March 8th, 2021. And I ask Tracy to please call roll.
Right in front of someone and be oblivious.
Probably. I think it's bitchy if they call her on it.
Yeah.
Ross,
Yeah.
please, W.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you ask for the roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay, I didn't hear it. Sorry. So, Kathy Clark,
Here.
Laura Reed,
Here.
Russ Day,
Here.
Kyle Duran,
Here.
Roland Herrera,
Here.
Elizabeth Smith,
Here.
Dan Kohler,
Here.
Ali Ruzuli,
Here.
Melissa Martin,
Here.
Francisco Saldivar,
Here.
Gerard Graveline, Hirsch Sangster, absent,
Is excused.
JD Gillis, saw JD's here, and then Jonathan Thompson.
And Jonathan Thompson is excused. He also sent an email saying he couldn't be here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from last year's task force meeting on March 9th, 2020.
We approved the minutes of last year.
Second.
Like maybe my signal is not strong. I need a motion to approve as presented.
I motion we approve the minutes as presented.
Moved by Laura.
Second.
Okay, moved by Elizabeth Smith, seconded by Laura Reed. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please unmute and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
There we go. Stand by one. Can you hear me now? Okay, all opposed, please signify by saying no. Motion passes unanimously. I'm about to switch servers. My there's the joys of the internet. Okay, now can you hear me? Yep, okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. All right, that takes us into the discussion for this evening that is in your packet. Tim, shall I turn it over to you to start off? Who's going to present on the Stormwater Long Range Plan?
You can go ahead and direct it my way. Chris, did you have anything that you wanted to start off with?
I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this meeting. This started years ago as a way of dealing with the recession, and we found that there was value in taking time prior to the nuts and bolts of the budget process to familiarize people with kind of a longer and broader vision of the city budget, finance, and our resources. So we've retained this annual meeting as a chance for our budget committee members to learn more about our budget and how we are using our resources for the people of Keizer. City Manager, would you like to weigh in, sir?
You just stole all of my thunder, so whatever she said. Tim, it's yours.
Well, thank you, everyone. I know it can be kind of a daunting task looking at the long-range plan for the city. I thank you for all of you for giving up one of your nights this week. I'm also having a hard time believing that it's been about a year since we've done this, and this was one of the last meetings that happened before we went down on our 2-week shutdown. So that ended up lasting a year. So it's been a wild ride. A lot's happened with the city. Our finances have been, we have had some ups and some downs, but I think we're kind of on even keel right now as we start putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. So that's a positive. To build on what this meeting is for, this is really a big picture update based on where we're landing at December 31st, 2020. So this is really a halfway look at what's happened during the year, and based on those trends, project out into the future. Some of the numbers that you're going to see tonight are not final budgets. They're not anywhere close to being final budgets. They really strictly are just projections pushed out into the future. The other objective for tonight is to get a little bit of feedback from the task force, get some insight into what you're thinking as far as priorities, direction, that kind of a thing as we do a checkup on the city to see where we're at with our goals. For some of the new members that are with us, the city operates a little bit differently than, say, a private business. A private business is really focused on the bottom line. Our emphasis is really on the ability to provide services. So it's a slightly different philosophy. We don't want to really get into the point where it's all about cost savings. How much cost savings do you really want when someone's dealing with your drinking water? It really is about providing services and high quality services. We're going to talk a little bit about funds. A fund in the government entity is really kind of a standalone business by itself. Each fund has its own set of books. They all balance. We do our budgeting based off of funds. The reason we do that is there are some restrictions on how cities can spend money. Some of our revenues that we receive can be used for one purpose, but they can't be used for another. So we can't be using water revenues to pay for our park department, and we can't use police fee revenues necessarily to pay for park improvements. So we really have to be pretty strict on keeping things separate. This meeting really is designed to give an exchange of information both ways. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to shoot them out. I am going to share my screen for part of the night, so I'm not going to be able to see all of you. I feel like I'm looking at Hollywood Squares or something like that. I'm not, I guess that kind of dates me a little bit, but that's kind of how I'm feeling. Either that or the Muppet Show, one of the two, I'm not sure. So anyway, with that, let's move on to the Stormwater Fund. This is page 4 in your packet, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen now. So that we're all kind of looking at the same thing. Okay. I'll get us to the stormwater area. So again, this is page 4 in the packet. The Stormwater Fund is a Public Works Department fund. It is a standalone entity that's designed to address the Federal Clean Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. This is primarily administrated by the state of Oregon through the Department of Environmental Quality. This has a bunch of regulations that we're required to follow. We have some permitting that we need to maintain, and this fund is really directed towards that. Our goal is to provide a storm drainage system that is safe, clean, and cost effective. So let's take a little look at how we're doing on those objectives. As far as cost effective goes, as we look out to some of the comparable cities that have similar type programs, we are really by far the lowest cost. There's some reasons for that. We did inherit a lot of the piping that the stormwater system entails, so we didn't have to do a lot of initial infrastructure build-in. Having said that, we did have to go back and look through all of the pipes, see what we had. Like I say, we inherited it from the county, so we weren't exactly sure what we had. We did do 100% inspection with remote cameras. That has been corrected, and we're moving from trying to figure out what we have to really maintaining what we have. So we're in a much better position now. But overall, with our program, to meet our requirements, we really are the low-cost provider in the area. Last year, we didn't propose a rate increase We had deferred some projects, had some things on hold. And then obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic, we didn't really want to rock the boat with too much of anything. So we kind of towed the line with the rate that we had in place last year. Even doing that, we were still able to invest quite a bit into the infrastructure itself. Over the last 10 years or so, we put in 1.9 million in capital improvements. Like I say, a lot of those were surprises. Oh, we didn't realize that this pipe was broken or that pipe was broken. We've gone through, we've identified all of the major items. Now we're just working on re-inspecting items, re-inspecting pipes, and kind of building out a ongoing maintenance capital improvement type of plan for ongoing recurring maintenance kind of things. So we're in a much better spot than we were, say, 10 years ago. As we look at the rate history, this started off as a fairly small fund. So you see that the rate increases kind of jumped up and down a little bit. Like I say, last year we didn't do a rate increase. However, we do think that in the future years, we'll probably need between a 40-cent and a 55-cent increase each year. We'll continue to address that as we go through time. Let's see. So if we move to, this is page 7. This really breaks out the long-range plan for us for the next 5 years. Again, looking into 21-22, at this point, we aren't anticipating needing to have a rate increase. So we're going to go for 2 years now without an increase. Again, this is really getting back to the fact that we're somewhat of a stable fund at this point. I see we have a hand raised. Ross, you have a question?
Getting back to what you were asking about, or you were saying about the 40 to 55-cent increase, monthly increase. Why are we going to need that in the future? Just curious.
The primary driver will be capital improvements. To the extent that we don't have capital improvements, we probably won't need as much of a rate increase in the future. So that's really going to be the driving factor for us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Phase moving from uh-ohs to planned improvements. So like I say, we're moving into a much better spot. So with this plan, really some of the key items is...
We have 2 questions.
Okay.
Sorry. Councilor Herrera has a question.
You know, Ross kind of covered mine, but I'm going to ask another one. In regards, I'm going to back up a bit. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Roland.
Thank you. Okay. Other issues. Okay. In regards to the stormwater system, I see that we do 10%. How does the pandemic, this whole thing affected our scheduling in regards to, trying to get 10% cleaned every year, how that works? And I know it's been done once, 100% have been done. I get that, but how has that affected our schedule in terms of the maintenance, keeping that up? Because I know it's pretty important in stormwater.
I would have to turn the question over to Bill Lawyer. I'm not exactly sure where we're at as far as re-inspecting and what that process is at this point.
Thank you, Tim. Interestingly enough, the whole COVID hasn't really impacted the ability of our contractor to inspect and clean our storm system. They're a small firm. Their folks stay together. When they're out working in the field, they're working by themselves or not in a large group. And so surprisingly enough, it really hasn't impacted as much as as I would have thought to begin with moving into this last year. They still were able to get over 10%, and looks like they'll be able to do that again from here on out.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense.
Tim, we have one more question in the chat from Melissa Martin. Was there any damage or impact on any of our stormwater systems from the ice storm?
Not that we're aware of. Nothing.
That is good news. And then I have one question before we let you continue. And then I see Councilor Reed has her hand up. I read the email today, and maybe it was from earlier, about the change in our stormwater regarding mercury, and that some additional work is going to be coming on managing the levels of mercury coming through our system, because we know it's naturally occurring. in the Mid-Willamette Valley. Is that going to change any of the planning for stormwater management?
I don't believe drastically. We've anticipated this. That's a numeric standard for the total maximum daily load, or TMDL. The TMDL is an implementation plan. It is not a permit like our other two permits are. It's just a requirement to have the plan. I did get a chance to glance at that letter this afternoon, and we have until about a year and a half, 18 months to come to have a compliance or a plan in place to comply with the standard. I don't see that there'll be a problem doing that. Again, this is something staff's been watching for a number of years, and we expected it. And honestly thought it was going to be finalized a little before it is now. So no, I don't see this being a major impact moving forward. Thank
you. Are there any questions of Tim or Bill before we continue on? Ross, do you still have your hand up, or do you have another question? Oh, sorry. Councilor Reed has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I was going to ask basically the same thing you were going to ask about the impact of the mercury requirements, but also the other big thing that we've had to do with this is the permitting that we've been working on for years, and now the implementing of that permitting. Is that mostly under the personnel services line item?
The biggest compliance portion for complying with the permit is personnel, yes, and the work that staff does, as opposed to capital projects or repairs. So again, this is something that now we have our permit in place for the MPDS Phase 2 permit. We know what the requirements are going to be. We have our roadmap, and we're moving forward to be compliant and hit every deadline that's established within the permit. And again, there really weren't any surprises to us in that when the permit was finally issued. There was a few, I won't say minor, but not major language things the way the permit was written, but nothing that was a shock or a surprise to us, and nothing that we didn't really anticipate as we watched the permit being developed and the requirements be put in place.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. Back to you, Tim.
Okay. So just some highlights from this plan. Again, no anticipated rate increase for the 21-22 year. As you look towards the middle of the screen, in this area, you can see that we're anticipating a 40-cent increase starting in 22-23. That's going to really be dependent upon our capital outlay plan and if we identify any additional items that we're going to need to take care of. At this point, it's not anticipating any staffing changes. I'm not going to go up or down as far as the staffing goes. And also, we're going to be looking at a moderate capital outlay into the future. If you look here, the day supply cash at end of year, our ideal amount is to have about 60 days worth of cash, about 2 months worth of supply. So we're a little bit ahead here. You can kind of see it as we go throughout the years, we kind of phase down. This is really intentional as a city. We do like to be cost conscious and not necessarily sit on people's money if we don't have to. So as we look out into the future, there is going to be continued pressure on us to make sure that we're looking at our costs and adjusting appropriately. We don't want to get into the position where we're collecting and holding a lot of money if we don't have to. So that's really also part of the reason that we're not going to be looking at a rate increase for the next year. That's really the summary of the stormwater plan. Is there any additional questions at this point?
I had a question. My question is does the estimated cash supply for the next several years take into account the proposed rate increase of 40 cents for each of those 4 years?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does include that as well. Any other additional questions? If not, I guess we can go ahead and move on to the water fund. The reason that we're looking at the stormwater and the water finder, these are the two utilities, somewhat of an enterprise business type activity that we look at. They're the ones that we have a fair amount of control over and can go sideways quickly if we're not paying attention. So as we look to the water system, the water system operates under the Oregon Administrative Rules for Public Water Systems, and it's enforced by the Oregon Health Authority Drinking Water Services. A lot of mumbo jumbo. I'll let Bill worry about that stuff. I just know that we have about 11,000 accounts that we deal with. The city does bill bi-monthly, so we're sending out billings for about 6,500 residents every month. The water system is managed under a master plan that was put together in 2012. That really dictates a lot of the capital improvements and the requirements that we have to keep the system running into the future. City of Keizer really does benefit from having water that runs right underneath us. It requires minimal processing, and that helps us have low cost water for the residents here. Although the balance to that is we do have hard water, and that can be a problem with staining and that kind of thing, as some of our residents let us know. Moving to the next page, again, our goal is to provide low cost, high quality water. As we look out to the other areas that in the surrounding area, we still are the low cost provider. And again, it just is a matter of the aquifer that runs underneath us requires very minimal processing. So we can pretty much pump it almost from the aquifer directly to people's houses without adding a lot of chemicals or doing any kind of treatment. And that's very different than, say, the city of Salem, who's pulling a lot of their water out of the river. They have to clean the water from the river, then pump it to wherever they need to go. And the cleaning is really the cost part. Like I say, the water system operates under the 2012 Water System Master Plan. It required quite a bit of capital outlay over the future years. To date, we've spent about $4 million in capital improvements. We have a couple of things left to work on. We do have in the plan additional reservoir and pump station. As last I've heard, we may not need that, and I'll let Bill chime into that if we actually do. Then also we have an ongoing steel water line replacement project. Those are the only real capital outlay items that we still have on the master plan. And so far we are on track to get that wrapped up.
About the chat,
Mm-hmm.
from JD Gillis, is there another master plan in process since this one is nearing the end of the planning period?
I'm holding off updating the master plan or redoing the water master plan, primarily because the bulk of the capital improvement program left in there is mainline replacement. The additional pump station and reservoir called for in the master plan is still actually, according to the master plan, out into the end of the 20s, maybe even as in early 30s. And so I don't think it's a good use of money to update the master plan just to update it because it's been 10 years. Again, primarily because the capital improvement projects left are mainline replacements, and we're methodically and systematically annually going through the system and replacing water mains.
That sounds good.
Sorry to interrupt, JD.
Last year at this time, we did recommend a 4% rate increase. We ended up not doing that increase. We cinched up our belts for a year, really in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, this year we are going to be looking at a 4% rate increase, really to get us back into our normal increases that we've experienced in the past. What the real driver for it is the ongoing capital outlay. If we didn't need to do the water line replacements, we could probably get by with a few more years of not having any increases at all. But unfortunately, we just have to keep reinvesting into the system that we have.
Tim, would you take a moment and talk about the program that was put in place to assist people who were impacted by the COVID-19 loss of jobs and how we help them with the utility?
Sure. During the year, the city received a grant, the CARES Act grant, to provide relief to residents and also a little bit to the city. We used approximately 300,000 of that, 1.3 million that we or 1.1 million that we received, to provide grants, I guess to provide assistance to Keizer residents. We worked with some of our partner agencies in the area, the Salvation Army and St. Vincent de Paul, and we put in a program really quickly for those that were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So if they were out of a job, laid off, had reduced hours, were suffering from COVID-19, they were able to go and get assistance and get their utility bills paid. It wasn't just City of Keizer water, stormwater bills, city services bills. This is for anything that they were dealing with. So any of their utilities and also their rent, mortgages, that kind of a thing as well. So we got a lot of folks. While I wish I could say that we got everyone back on their feet, I think we did do some significant help for the people that we were able to get in contact with.
Thank you for bringing everybody up to date on that. Bill, you've got your hand up, Bill Lawyer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one other point as a follow-up to Mr. Gillis's question on the master plan. I would propose, instead of doing a master plan update or anything like that, maybe in fiscal year 22-23, we look at a rate study. The water fund just completed paying off debt in the current budget cycle. It's going to take a year of nothing and then sit back and then start looking at the rate, have the rates, hire a consultant to evaluate our rate structure, because it's been 20 years or so since that's been done. I think that's a much better use of money from the water fund than a master plan update.
Thank you, Bill. Is that something that we should maybe talk about for our goal setting?
That's entirely up to the council, Madam Mayor. Something staff, at least this staff person, has been kind of planning on anyway. But if you want to add it to the goals, that's certainly your prerogative.
We will follow up that discussion. Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Tim, I'm not seeing any hands up, so.
Well, building on what Bill Lawyer said, I do agree that we need to do a rate structure that hopefully is going to be slated into either next year or shortly thereafter. I think that will require some city councilor involvement as we work through some of the policies that may have some impacts on the rates into the future. As Bill indicated, we did pay off our debt last year, or actually this year. So that's kind of an exciting thing. It's not very often that you get to write the final check on a large sum of debt. So I think it took us 10 years to get through that, and we paid our debt in full. So I appreciate that. As we look at the long-range plan for the water system, a couple of things to note. This does project a 4% rate increase into the future. That's consistent with what we've been talking about for a while now. This also does anticipate a water rate study, so that 4% may get adjusted slightly as we look at how to allocate the water revenues. This does factor in that the debt has been paid off. This is also factoring in that the staffing is going to remain consistent within the fund. And also, in addition, the capital outlay will have ongoing moderate water line replacements every year into the future to complete the master plan. Again, as we look at the days cash supply at year end, ideally we'd like to have that about 60. And again, you can see as we go into the future, it kind of drives down and actually goes negative way out here. This is really a conscious decision to project it this way so that we continue to keep pressure on ourselves to be conscious with the spending that we do. We'll adjust that accordingly as we get out into the future, and there will be some cost savings. So I'm just looking at this, it's not necessarily a doom and gloom at this point. So with that, is there any additional questions on the water system?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Tim, it looks like the rate increase is not included in the projections above. Is that correct?
The rate increase should be included, yes.
But it still goes out to a negative days cash supply at the 25-26.
Correct. And we'll end up seeing some cost savings, most likely in the capital outlay, that'll offset that quite a bit. As we've gone through time with a lot of the water line replacements, a lot of the projects have come in a lot lower than what we anticipated. I think I have the number here somewhere. Yeah, we've saved about almost $750,000 throughout the last several years as far as water line replacement projects. So we'll adjust accordingly as we go along. We just want to make sure that we continue to have the pressure to use the funds that we get from the citizens wisely.
Sure, I understand that. Do you go back and reforecast your budgets if you're $750,000 off?
We would. Every year we have a reset. So this forecast is built off of what we know at this point. So it will take into consideration any savings that we have throughout the entire fund.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, just to clarify, that $750,000 was not 1 year, was it?
No, that was 4 or 5 years at least.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay.
Okay. Let's move on to the general fund. There's going to be a little bit of a change as we look at the long-range plan this year. I'm calling this the general operating fund. So this goes beyond just the general fund that you'll see at budget time. In order for us to really get a clear view of what's going on, this includes the activity from the Park Services Fund as well as the Police Services Fund, all combined into one. Our auditors make us do this every year because really the other ones are primarily just an offshoot of the general fund anyway, so you might as well just combine them. So we'll call this the chief operating fund of the city. The general operating fund, it accounts for everything that's not required to be accounted for somewhere else. So this is kind of the junk drawer of all funds. It includes, I wouldn't say the activities are necessarily junky, but everything gets kind of thrown in here. You'll see some of the areas have quite a wide range of things when we get into budget time. But in general, this provides for the police department, municipal court, planning, parks operation, and then general government. As far as the functions go, the police department is overwhelmingly the largest piece at about 66%. The revenues for the general fund include property taxes, license fees, intergovernmental revenues, cigarette and liquor taxes. The general fund is really the city's most constrained. It has the most limited ability for us to actually do anything with respect to the revenues. It's also highly dependent upon growth within the city for additional revenue. As you can see at the population graph, we grew 5 people last year. So I think that was one house that got built maybe. All kidding aside, as we look back, starting in the 2016, 17, 18, 19, right in that area, that's where you saw a lot of retirement living, apartment complexes, a few subdivisions going in. So the growth in Keizer is really somewhat dependent upon if you build it, they will come. Right now, we're kind of maxed out as we've learned through some of our housing needs analysis type of projects that we just don't have much space. And that really is limiting the growth that we're seeing into the future. And that'll impact a lot of the revenues that we see. So as we move to this area, the general operating fund revenues versus expenditures, this is the tightrope that I walk every year. You can see that the lines are almost on top of each other. Some years the revenues are a little higher, some years the expenses are a little higher, but they pretty much parallel each other. This makes me very uncomfortable, and I think it's by design. When the city was founded, we had a very low tax rate, meaning the residents at the time wanted minimal government services. So our goal here is that we're taking the resources that we have and using them to the best of our abilities. So we push the envelope as far as the services that we provide, and this tightrope is what we end up walking. Was there a question?
Yes, there's a question in the chat from Chief Cowan. It says the general fund for police is 66%, I think you said. And he said, I recall about 80% in the past. Does the percentage come down with the police fees?
The reason it dropped down really is because we're including the entire park services budget in as well. So that adds quite about $1 million worth of costs that you probably haven't seen in the past. So if we pulled that out, you'd probably see the police department somewhere between 75 and 80% of the general fund.
Thank you.
So as we move on to the general operating fund revenues, our goal really is to diversify as much as we can. We've been very reliant on property taxes and franchise fees. As you can see here in the 2017 area, we added the police and the park fees, and those have added a little bit to the diversification. But unfortunately, we still really are reliant upon property taxes and franchise license fees. That really is limited. Again, if we don't see a lot of growth, we're not going to be seeing a lot of additional revenues coming to the city. So we're going to have to continue to make do with what we have. The largest piece is the property taxes. And as we look at this chart here, the orange bar is the real market value. You can just see that it has skyrocketed over the last several years. This is really good if you're a current homeowner, not so good if you're trying to get into the homeowner market. It really is somewhat of a product of supply and demand. The free market is kind of dictating, and that really is limiting people's opportunities to get into the housing market. The blue line, or the blue bars, are the assessed value. So while the real market value has significantly increased, the assessed value continues to plod along about 3% or so a year. You can see the line here. This is the percentage increase decrease starting in 2014-15, back when we were building apartment complexes and retirement centers. You could really see that the assessed value increased, over 4% and almost to 5% one year. Unfortunately, with the limited growth, we're seeing the increase in the assessed value really dropping back down closer to the 3%, which is really the statutory increase that we can expect going into the future. Without any additional growth within the city, that's really going to be the new standard moving forward. Unfortunately, that hits us about 55 to 65,000 of lost property tax revenues when you compare that back to the 4% years. So that hurts on a compounding kind of basis over time.
Tim, there's a question in the chat from Melissa. While we may not be growing in residents, aren't we growing commercially? How is that impacting revenues for the city, especially with growth in Keizer Station?
That's a good question. And unfortunately, the commercial properties within Keizer are such a small percentage. Overall, we are really a residential bedroom type of community, unfortunately. So while we're seeing some growth out at Keizer Station, it's really not enough to really be that impactful for us. You can see, well, even in 1920, we had In-N-Out, a few places like that came to town, and still we're right at about a little over 3% increase in assessed value. So unfortunately, it's not a big enough piece for us overall in comparison to the residential side.
Well, and I might add that while we added, one or two buildings in Keizer Station Area A is pretty much at build out and has been for a few years. Am I correct there?
Yep, that's correct.
So we see some construction now in Area D, which is where the Chick-fil-A, 7-Eleven, etc. is under construction, but we won't see those property taxes until at least 22.
Right, and in addition to that, they're much smaller areas than Area A was, and so even when they build out, they're not going to have the same impact that Area A did.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions on the assessed value real market conundrum? That was a good question.
I do think it would be interesting. I like the idea. I'll add in the future a breakdown of the type of property taxes, type of residence that we have. I think that's a good add, and you can see the relationship between the residential and the commercial.
And what might also be helpful is that I hope that the River Cherry Overlay District will continue to see some changeover time with going from just commercial, just residential to the mixed use. What do you anticipate to be the impact for our property tax revenues from that change?
I don't have that one in front of me. Another good question.
Well, and maybe Shane wants to chime in here. That will probably have an impact over time, because if we start going vertical and create denser development, I mean, there's no doubt that kind of construction is more valuable than a single family home on a similar footprint. But it's going to take a long time to develop those kinds of projects. And so that may create a shift, but it'll probably be over a 20-year time period.
Yeah, and I'll jump in just briefly. One of the things with the revitalization project that we went through, there was a market analysis element that the consultant performed. And one of the challenges with River Road in realizing that redevelopment is that essentially the property values on River Road currently are fairly good returns on investment for the owners and the developers of those sites. So that's where they kind of identified that there are some things that the city could choose to do to help catalyze that development. Things like street design and some significant investments. One of the things I identified was the possibility of urban renewal helping kind of spur some of that redevelopment potential. But I think the difficulty is that we have very few vacant parcels. We have a handful, and maybe the market factors get to the point where it makes sense, although the three largest parcels we have are held with longtime property owners that don't have a big interest in developing right now. So I think Chris is absolutely right. It's probably more of definitely the long view, because I think without significant public investment on the city's part, if it's left sheerly to market factors, it's going to just take longer until those property values get to a point where it makes sense for a developer to come in and drop millions of dollars to redevelop at those higher densities. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Shane. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hand raises, so okay. Good conversation.
Moving on to license and fees. This is the second biggest category for the city. We charge 5% for natural gas, electricity, garbage, cable, and broadband, water, sewer, and stormwater, and then 7% for telephone. You can see as we look at the chart, we got hit bottom about 2012-13 and been slowly increasing. You can see the years where we had some significant development. 16-17, 17-18, we saw a step up, and that really is the retirement centers and the apartment complexes where we're adding residents, adding units as far as the city goes. For the most part, at this point, we've somewhat leveled off as far as the franchise fees go. We're not seeing increased number of residents, so that correspondingly, these companies are not seeing increases in the services that they're providing. We're really kind of stuck. We're seeing pressure downward based off of energy efficient appliances, those type of things. That's a little bit counterbalanced during 2021 with the nesting effect that we're seeing with a lot of folks who are staying at home. Surprisingly, we saw a slight increase in cable this year after several years of declining revenues there. Really an indicator that people are spending more time at home for obvious reasons. So we are seeing the ongoing cut the cable kind of situation as well. So telephone has dropped off significantly this year, and we're going to expect that to continue into the past or into the future. So really, with franchise fees, we're anticipating that they're going to be fairly flat for the near term, at least. Moving on to intergovernmental.
Hey, Tim, sorry to interrupt. I do have a question in the chat from Chief Cowan. Talking about a catalyst for growth, urban renewal has new incentive participants for development to make sense for developers to come to Keizer. Bonaventure was an example of a bigger gain with the assessed property value than in and out. Do you see opportunities such as this in the future? So I think the idea of using urban renewal as an incentive for developers to redevelop a property into a higher value.
I'll jump in there on that one. Urban renewal is really the only tool we have available to us in the state of Oregon for public investment, other than simply pledging general fund dollars towards projects or purchasing land and dedicating that to a project. We, of course, closed out our urban renewal district several years back basically as a promise to the community. We're going to do these things with it, and then we're going to close it out. And we did those things, and we did close it out. And so, at some point here, especially, as Shane was talking about, if we want to see the Cherry River Road overlay district blossom, some other projects perhaps, that really will be a discussion that we're going to have to bring back to council about whether or not it's time to start thinking about adding another urban renewal district back into the mix to do certain things. Strategically use that kind of a tool to invigorate and artificially accelerate development with it. So, I suspect that in the next few years, next 1 to 3 years, we're going to be having that discussion. Chief Cowan knows also that we have some opportunities now that we didn't have the last time we had our urban renewal district open, to partner with special districts like Fire District. So there are some opportunities there, whereas it used to be that urban renewal districts were kind of an anchor for those special districts, and they didn't really realize the gain until they closed out, which could be, well, in the case of Salem, for instance, they have urban renewal districts that just perpetuate. And so some of those special districts never realize that increase in value that you get when you close out the district. But there are some incentives now where we can work with our special districts and see if we can offset some of their needs up front, so that we can use that tool to accelerate development. So it's something we'll be talking about in the next year or so.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and I've just made a note to myself that this may be something to go into our long-range plan to have a conversation about, since we haven't finalized that. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay, moving on to intergovernmental revenues. These are revenues, grants type of things that we receive from other state, local agencies. The biggest that we're seeing is liquor tax and state revenue sharing, and the state revenue sharing is liquor tax basically as well. We're seeing a significant increase this year. I wonder why. I think it's a lot of day drinking at home or something like that. In the past, it used to be that we'd talk about the breweries, then we started talking about the distilleries, and now I think it's just the nesting effect that is continuing to increase those revenues. At some point, I think they're going to level out. However, for the time being, I think we're going to continue to see an increase over time.
Tim, there's a question. Councilor Day has his hand up.
Yeah, I had a question about revenues. Are we seeing any revenues from cannabis sales tax?
We are. First rule of Pot Club is I'm not supposed to talk about Pot Club, but yes, we are seeing revenues there. For the city-wide, we're seeing about $220,000 altogether as far as those revenues go. But I am sworn to secrecy just because of the privacy laws involved with the entity's tax records and such. So.
Tim, can you talk to us a little bit, if you know, about the impact of Measure 110?
I don't have any impact yet. I'm not sure. We don't receive some of the revenues often enough to know the impact. I know that cigarette tax took a fairly big hit when they added a bunch of additional taxes onto a pack of cigarettes. So that was pretty recent, but I'm not sure how long lasting that's going to be. As far as the other items, I'm not sure.
So I know that there's been work done in the legislature to offset the impact of Measure 110 on the revenues that do come in for cities that have a sales tax. So as far as I know, at this point, it's still very much up in the air, but I would encourage people to track that legislation as it moves through and is developed. I think we're watching that sausage being made, so to speak, at this time. But it could have as it stands right now, as I understand it from Measure 110, it could have a significant impact negatively on our general fund. And that's why the legislature is being strongly urged to do something different and keep the city general funds as whole as possible. So stay tuned on that. League of Oregon Cities for council and anybody who would like to go check, League of Oregon Cities is tracking this legislation.
Well, that's really the major trends that we're seeing with a lot of the general operating funds revenues. I'm going to, at this point, move to the expenditures that we're seeing. So when we look at, what are we paying for out of the general fund, approximately 75% of the general fund expenditures are personal services. We're really selling people, and with that, we're selling police department. That makes up the majority of the expenses within the general fund. Materials and services at about 19%. Surprisingly, a lot of that consists, about a fourth of that roughly is made up of 911 call center costs. So when you carve that out, there's really not a lot of materials and services really even worth talking about after you get through the insurances and that kind of a thing. As far as capital outlay goes, that's about 6% of our budget, and that's really going for park improvements and police cars. Not much else to see there. So like I say, we're primarily a people organization. So when we have to cinch our belts, that really means the people is unfortunately where we have to go to almost immediately. As we move to the next page, our objective as a city is to maintain full staffing as much as possible. Like I say, we are people oriented. That's what we do. Unfortunately, during 2020-21, we did take a step back. We had budgeted about 103 employees throughout the entire city. and we're currently at about 96. So we've had to do some intentional restructurings just to cinch our belts as we move through the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the more interesting things to see is we have a lot of longevity in our city. The average years of service throughout is 12 and a half years. If you make it a few years, you're likely going to make it a long time. This does have some impact, though, as we look at trying to change the culture or the underlying characteristics of the workforce. It's going to take a long time. It's not an overnight kind of scenario for us to be able to make a lot of changes quick. So when we look at the areas where we had to make significant cuts during the year, the ones that really stand front and center is obviously the community center and also the administrative assistant that was helping support the community center. Those two positions, unfortunately, we did do a reduction in force in November. We've also had to hold off on some police hirings, and we had some intergovernmental revenues that didn't come through for us because things were shut down. So that was a challenge for us as well. We also didn't backfill the community development director. So that's a role that was put on hold and ultimately got transitioned to a planning director. And then we also had some unfilled positions in the stormwater environmental group. Some of it also is just a matter of timing of trying to get people in the door and hired up. But having said that, like I say, when you think about changing the demographics and characteristics of our city, it's a long-term effort. Not a lot can happen overnight when the average career is about 12 and a half years. So as we move to the positions that are supported directly and indirectly by the general fund, am I seeing a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. I've got a question in the chat. How many officers are funded by the police fee?
Well, the police fee was intended to support 5 additional officers.
Okay, thank you.
So as we look at the positions that are directly and indirectly supported by the general fund, obviously the biggest is the police. Back in 2016-17, we kind of bottomed out at about 43 and a half employees. Just through attrition, trying to get people in the door, budgetary constraints, and we have been able to get up to about almost to 48. A fully staffed police department is 50 employees, so we're still a little bit short of the mark that we were hoping to get to. As we look through the other areas, planning, you can see this year we went from 3.76 positions to 2.84. And again, that's the loss of the community development director position. Then we obviously have code enforcement, which is a partial employee, parks, which is 3.9 employees, and municipal court, which is 1 employee. When we look at the indirect positions supported by the general fund, you can see finance department, we dropped down. This is the result of losing the administrative assistant. Then all the other ones are fairly consistent with prior years. So the challenge is, when our budget does get tight, when people say you have to live within your means and cinch up your belt, unfortunately, this means we really have to go towards the direct employees supported by the general fund. With all the partial positions, it's really challenging to go and say, okay, we're going to reorganize, restructure, take this position out to have much of a significant impact on the general fund, unfortunately. So as we look into the future, our projections really are based on getting everyone as much as we can back to full staffing. Our second objective within this area is to provide compensation that is consistent with comparative agencies. We do go out and periodically see what other agencies are paying their employees, and we do this through the collective bargaining process. We also do this for non-represented positions as well. You can kind of see where we fall in the last couple of years. Currently, the CPI that we base a lot of our decisions off of is 1.7% increase over the prior year. So as we look into the future, you'll probably see somewhere around that range of 1.5% to 2.5%, somewhere in that as far as cost of living increases going forward.
Tim, just to help any viewers who don't know what a CPI is, can you define that acronym for us, please?
Consumer Price Index. So we go out and look at the Bureau of Labor develops these statistics for us and for us we use the CPI West Class BC. We were with a different index previously, but that one has since gone away. This is the closest one we can find that would correlate to the city of Keizer within this area as far as the clerical workers' cost of living increase would be.
Thank you, appreciate that. And then as far as salary surveys and making sure that both are represented through the collective bargaining process and are non-represented are treated with the same level of consideration for the value of their work and service. We do the salary surveys for both the non-represented and the represented. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
The next major category of costs within the personal service is health insurance. It was kind of shocking to look at the chart today to see, back in the early days, we were seeing closer to 10% increases every year. That is hard to stomach for me. We're seeing a drop. We saw a 3% increase last year. At this point, we're kind of projecting out a 5.7% for this year. It's still estimated into the future for next year. I do think that we're going to see some benefit from the nesting effect. Folks have not been going to the doctors as much over the last year. A lot of the elective discretionary kind of procedures have been deferred. So I think we may see a little bit of a reprieve in our insurance rates going into the future.
Well, I want to give a shout out to our Human Resources Department who have worked hard to really shop around for the health insurance benefits that will be, provide the kind of services that our employees want, but get a good value for our taxpayers. So shout out to Michelle DePina and the work that she does with you, Tim, on pricing this out.
I guess moving on to the big elephant in the room, PERS, the thing that no one wants to talk about ever. It keeps me up at night. The city started with PERS for the police department since the beginning of time. For the rest of the city, we came on board in 2009. As we started looking at our rates, it was very attractive back in the early days. You can see for the OpSerp General folks, 2.86% was the contribution rate. That is significantly increased, quadrupled up to almost 10% during the last year. And unfortunately, it's going to get even higher as we look at the next coming reset period, which is July 1st, 2021. We're seeing the expected trend of Tier 1, Tier 2 employees slowly retiring. And they currently have the highest contribution rates and highest cost. Those are being replaced by people within the OpSerp Police and Fire and OpSerp General categories. But unfortunately, those other categories, the contribution rates are starting to increase significantly, and we'll probably catch up with the Tier 1, Tier 2 folks in the near future. As far as rates go, they're really highly dependent on investment returns within the stock market. I got off of a conference call today, and the PERS investment return was about 7.6% for 2020. The assumed rate, which is what they base all of our rates off of, is 7.2%. So we'll actually see a little bit of a benefit, but probably not much to really notice, is what they were saying. They're anticipating that we're probably going to have some tough rates for probably 4 to 6 years, and then things will level off, if not decline. There is some legislation currently in process, quite a few bills trying to address PERS costs and what can we do with them. A lot of them haven't been super successful in the past, so we'll kind of have to see where a lot of that stuff goes. As far as next year, my back of the napkin projection says we're going to have an impact of about $400,000 from the rate increases. And that's really one of the reasons why we can't buy nice things very often. Every 2 years, we get hit with something like that is just hard to recover from. Given our current budgeting philosophy, if we know it's coming, can't we just save up for it? When we save, let's save up for it. What that means is let's cut personnel now so we can pay the PERS costs in the future. And that's the challenging situation, the balance, the tightrope that we walk of, how much do we try to save for the future versus providing current services now.
Tim, is the 400,000 over what we saw in the last budget, or is that total?
That would be over what we saw in the last budget. So about 50% of that roughly will be general fund impact, direct general fund impact.
So general fund will be take an additional hit between $200,000 and $250,000.
That's correct.
Snap. Councilor Day has a question.
Can you explain what the rates mean? The contribution rate, 20.65%. Can you explain what that means?
So we as a city are required to contribute 20.65% of a tier 1, tier 2 of their salary, including vacation pay, overtime, anything. So that would be a percentage of their gross salary that the city is required to contribute to PERS.
Because that was a big jump over the last several years. Is that just because of the sheer cost of the PERS program?
It's a combination of multiple things. Investment return is the biggest one. So to the extent that the PERS does not earn the assumed rate, which is currently 7.2%, that deficit has to be made up by the agencies that participate in PERS. So that's really where we're seeing probably one of the biggest hits. The other is payouts on the back end when people start receiving benefits. As I recall, I think they had pegged a certain percentage of, they wanted people to earn about, don't quote me on this, but 50% of their average final salary or something like that. They're really seeing people closer to the 70%. So somewhere within the actual PERS calculation, their model has been a little bit overly generous in the past, and they're trying to figure out how to legislatively back that down. So it gets back to where they had originally tried to set up the program to be.
Thank you. Any other questions on PERS? Not seeing any additional hand raises, so let's proceed.
Moving on to materials and services. Like I say, this is significantly impacted by Willamette Valley Communication Center. It's the single largest item of material and services that we end up paying for. After that, you're starting to talk about insurance, the general property liability type of insurance, those kind of things. Really not a whole lot to talk about other than we try to be as cost conscious as we can. You'll see the big spike in 2021. That's the result of the CARES grant that we received. So we've spent quite a bit of building up some of the infrastructure for the city, a lot of technological improvements to try to make us a little bit more efficient, but also enable the remote working and also the additional paperless type of environments.
Like a Zooming.
Like Zooming, yes.
Remembering where we were a year ago, trying to figure it out. Was Zoom part of anybody's day on a regular basis a year ago? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, no. So that's been a huge lift. And isn't IT in your department, Tim?
IT is in my department, and we're exhausted. It's been a long year with a lot of projects.
Well, it's nice to see the payoff, especially with the meeting tonight. Any other questions on one other thing on the 911 call center? There is a fee on our phone bills that goes toward that. And way back a long time ago, there was this notion that that would cover the cost. That hasn't covered the cost for a long time. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
We're currently anticipating getting about $225,000 in the 911 tax. We actually don't receive it anymore. We forward it and get it paid directly to Willamette Valley Communication Center, and they reduce our bill proportionally with that. Still, at the end of the day, it's still $550,000 per year for 911 call center. So the gross amount is closer to $750,000-ish. So it's a big cost. They do great work, but it is expensive for a city our size.
Thank you.
Moving on to the capital outlay, again, not a lot to talk about here. As I indicated before, it's really just park improvements and police vehicles. So that's really all that we spend our money on.
We've got one question from Laura. Wasn't there some recent legislation raising the phone tax?
There is legislation out there, and it has increased. We're starting to see a little bit of it start to trickle in. I'm not exactly sure what the increase overall is going to end up being for us. I do know that instead of getting that amount passed on to us as a city and reducing what we had to pay, Willamette Valley Communication Center is using it to build up some of their infrastructure and reinvest in their systems and processes.
Good question. Thank you, Councilor Reed. Any other questions?
Okay.
Right.
So this is really the general fund plan into the future. Again, typical with where we've been at in the past, there's really that uncomfortable pressure to continue to provide as much services as we can while still maintaining a safe bottom line. This really does force us to be cost conscious and not spend where we don't necessarily have to. Some new things to take into consideration this year. We do have a line for new revenues. The city does own some properties that we need to get into play. We've considered some leasing opportunities, and this plan really does anticipate that we'll at least start that process and get something moving forward into the future. You're also going to see the police services fee. We are anticipating an increase. Last year at this time when we were talking, I had said we're probably looking at about $1.33 for the 2020-21 year, so the year that we're currently in. Again, because of the pandemic, we cinched our belts and decided not to do that. Unfortunately, that really results in somewhat of a compounding impact. In order to keep the police department somewhat whole, we're really looking at an increase in time. We're still continuing to try to cinch that back as much as we can. And we can talk about the police service fee in a little bit here. This also does try to project no changes in staffing or services provided to the extent possible. Again, if we have to adjust our revenues, if we have to adjust based off of our revenues, then we'll have to probably continue to put the brakes on some of our staffing. Again, our overall, our personnel expenditures really are outpacing the increases in our revenues. So we continue to have an ongoing problem that we have to wrestle with. And that's really why you're seeing some of the police service fee increases. We really are trying to keep as much as we can status quo. try to find ways to leverage, build in efficiencies to the extent that we can. The good news, though, is
Tim, sorry, Councilor Kohler has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What is a cyber attack? How does that fit in all this budget and projection? How did we, where did those funds come from? How do we keep, we're pretty sure we're not going to have that problem in the future?
Sure. So for those that are new to the committee task force, we did get hit with the cybersecurity incident back last June. Those funds, we had to pay out close to $100,000 roughly. Those funds were spread out throughout the funds proportionally based off of, I guess, based off of the IT usage. So we used the same type of allocation that we did. But you're seeing those built into, well, you're really probably not, I'm trying to do the math here. Yeah, you're probably seeing those in the projected 2021 numbers already. So those have been factored in addition to a lot of the IT upgrades that we had to do as well. You shouldn't see any of those moving into the 21, 22 or beyond periods. But again, they're spread out throughout the different areas.
Okay. Any other questions on this spreadsheet? I'm not seeing any more.
The positive news is we do have enough. We try to maintain a 15% ending fund balance. As we're looking out to 21, 22, and 22, 23, we should be in a fairly good position as we get out to those years. We do have the ongoing pressure as we get out much past that to figure out some additional funding or make sure that we can find some efficiencies in our cost areas.
Okay.
So this is a carve out of the police services fee.
Looks like Councilor Kohler, is there a question on the previous spreadsheet, Councilor?
It actually goes back a couple of spreadsheets. I've been trying to rack my brain saying $750,000 a year for 911 services. How many calls do we have, and how much per call does that really cost us?
I don't have that information, but I could get that for you. I'll have that for budget time.
Councilor Reed has a question. Are you good, Councilor Kohler? Okay, Councilor Reed?
Yes, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, they interestingly did cover this in the Citizens Police Academy, and Chief Teague, you might want to clarify my basic understanding of this, but it's not that we have even a choice of our contributions to the 911 center. That is just part of being in the region. And so I'm going to say your question is kind of irrelevant in that we don't have anything to say about our contribution to that. Is that correct, Chief T?
Well, what is it, Tim, about $130,000 in taxes that we don't have any choice in where that goes. We do have a choice in where the roughly $550,000 goes, but that would be nowhere near enough to staff a communication center. Two, there's legislation that seeks to compel consolidation. The chiefs and sheriffs have remained rather neutral on that, but that's where the pressure is. That's coming largely out of the emergency management community. The dispatchers themselves are against that particular legislation in its current form. But Councilor Kohler, I tell you that it's really rather a bargain for us to get around the clock dispatching and record service after hours for $500,000. To answer your other question, what does it cost us per call for service? I used to know those figures off the top of my head when I attended those meetings. Now Trevor Winning, our support lieutenant, Trevor follows those or attends those for me instead. But it's surprising. It's somewhere, it used to be around 8, so I'll guess now it's somewhere around $10 per call for service that it cost us. Those are 911 calls. Those are calls to 390-2000. Where we save money is when we're open during hours and we get calls at our front desk. We don't pay anything for those unless we satellite them in to dispatch to then be dispatched. Okay. You still want Tim to report back? Because I'll be part of feeding him information. Okay.
That would be helpful.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Phil.
Good discussion. Thank you. Any other questions? Scrolling. I don't see any more hand raises. Oh, Rob,
Okay.
Councilor Day? Nope. Okay. And nothing in the chat. So moving on. Next page.
Okay. Well, like I was saying, last year at this time, we were recommending an increase in the 2021 year of $1.33, and then during the 21-22 year of additional $2.06. Really an increase over those 2 years of $3.39. We've really tried to scale that back as much as we possibly can. Again, this is still preliminary, but right now we're looking at about a $2 increase for the year, probably effective July 1st going forward if it gets approved. Some of the things to take in consideration, we really are taking the savings from the community development director position, and most of that's getting rolled into the police department. Also the savings from the administrative assistant. We're also taking advantage into the future that we had an agreement with some of the overlapping tax jurisdictions. When we amended the urban renewal district, we had an agreement to repay the taxing jurisdictions the lost revenues. We paid most of them back, and I believe this year will be the final payment that we have. So the savings from not having to pay that money out also is factored in to try to keep the rate increases into the future down. Also, when we started the police services fee, we were actually collecting more in revenues than we were actually needed at the time. That was intentional to build a little bit of a contingency, a little bit of a reserve. We anticipate that we'll use some of that contingency reserve to offset potential increases for the next year. So this is really where we're lining up. You're going to see a significant increase in the personnel services area. We're down about $400,000 this year compared to our budget. And that really does have to do with a couple of positions on hold, delays in getting some positions backfilled, that kind of a thing. So you're going to see that impact, plus the additional PERS hit that we talked about earlier of about $200,000 in addition to some insurance costs. So that's really where we're seeing the majority of the cost increase, really getting us back to a full police department of 50 full-time employees. So that's kind of the story with the police fee. Any additional questions at this point?
I'm going to circle back on one point, and that was when we passed the police fee, it was based on positions. So in order to maintain those positions, in addition to what the general fund can support, it was what we passed at that time was to maintain those 5 positions, and they were specified in the resolution about what services people were going to be paying for with those 5 positions. So that's going to factor into what we are looking at for the increase, is to maintain the positions that we as a council identify, the advice we took from the chief on identified services, level of service. So I just want to make sure that's clear to anybody who has a question about what that is targeted for.
I might pop up here real quick and I'll ask Chief to provide support, but we've been talking internally a lot about the need to kind of pivot away from really recognizing that police fee is supporting 5 specific positions, because what we're seeing is, yes, the fee can support those 5 positions, but we're having to reduce positions outside of those 5 to accommodate them. So we need to roll that discussion into a more comprehensive look at this fee is required to maintain a department of this size that does these things, which includes those 5 positions, but is not exclusive of them. So, Chief, do you have something to add that you want to?
Well, with regard to that in particular, I'll defer to Tim. That it covers more than just the 5. The way Tim described it to me last week is we'll always hold on to the 5. It's really I say always. I don't mean to be pejorative or by saying that, but for sake of argument, we'll always hold on to the 5. The increase in the fee is really a discussion about, do we keep the department whole or not? Is that right, Tim?
That is correct. As I indicated, our personnel costs are really outpacing the limited increases in revenues that we've been seeing. So this is what you're seeing now is our attempt to get us back up to 50 overall employees within the police department.
I think the million dollar question really is it worth it to the people that live and to a lesser degree work in Keizer? Although I can provide a few cases that are somewhat interesting about being an employer in Keizer with regard to the services we provide. But the million dollar question is it worth it to people that live here in Keizer to have this police fee that's clearly very nominal, but does increase at about $1 a year. It ends up being in 4 years, $10 a month rather than $4 a month. I'm prepared to give the budget committee and especially the council members some memorable talking points around that, because I realize you're going to face these questions out in the community. Because people should ask, they should. I get it.
Chief, I think that would be very helpful to understand the service level that is being provided by our police, and so we can have that conversation and understand how the dollars are helping us fund services for public safety.
Yeah, Mayor, I can barely hear you. But you said you say we're going to, or you want to have that right now?
No, if you would, we're not prepared to have that conversation at this time, but I think that's going to be an important conversation at budget and following that.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Okay. We're going to move to the park system long-range plan. Again, this gets carved out a little separately because we do have a park system master plan, and that plan is currently being reviewed and updated this year. So what we're seeing here is definitely not locked in stone. We're going to roll the impact of that review into this, and you'll see those results probably next year at this time. Really, the big piece will be how do we line up all the different projects that we're looking to accomplish. Again, the park system is funded by 3 sources. You have the general fund support, you have the parks fee revenue, and then also a small amount of revenue from park reservation fees and some property rental income. So it's been pretty stable. The nice thing about this is it's a lot of projects. So we have the 3.9 employees that are allocated to this, and they're going gangbusters, especially after the ice storm. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and he can kind of give Bill Lawyer, and he can give us an update on what we've done with the parks fee, some of the projects.
Thank you, Tim. Included in the packet is the accomplishments that we've made with the fees since it was implemented. and an updated priority list. Robert and I put this list together initially, knowing that we would have some things move up and down within the list, and we have. One of the big things to note is that the replacement of the Claggett play structure. We originally had that slated for year 3, but it became apparent that it needed to move up, so we moved it up and moved some picnic shelters at the Big Toy down, for instance. We were able to complete some things, the charge house demolition and part of the gravel pads last year, ahead of, they were supposed to be done this year. I had some volunteers come forward and want to taking that house down, so we let them do that. They had a great time and we saved a lot of money. So we just updated our list. There's no additions, there's no changes other than the years of the projects being done. As Tim mentioned, we're in the middle of updating the Parks Master Plan. Once that is complete and adopted, we will assess the priorities and the capital improvement projects that come out of that plan, and fit those in where they can fit within the priorities of the system overall. The consultant working on the master plan was given this list that you see in front of you to incorporate into the master plan, to incorporate into the priority list, to use that with the public outreach and let folks know what our plans are as staff and council and see how they supported or didn't support that list. That work is still underway, and as the master plan is finalized and adopted, that'll give us a roadmap into the future.
Thank you. Melissa, you've got a question? Or do you want me to read it from the chat?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. My question is, what kind of revenue are we expecting to get from the food truck pads? And how long will it take for that initial investment to pay for itself and then actually create revenue for the park system?
It's a great question. To be honest, we have not anticipated any revenue from the food truck pads, primarily because that's the concept is to be part of the city-sponsored concert series, and they would only be there during the concerts, kind of take the place of the existing concession shack that's there now. So the idea was to just give a place, and we'll work out the details and the revenue and all that as we get interest. And of course, the whole concert series being put on hold last year kind of delayed all this. But we have at this point anticipated no revenue from that at all. Mainly the idea was to help offset the individual or group putting on the concert series, offset their costs, with the city's commitment still being providing the facility at no charge for the concert series.
Yeah, realistically, I don't think we're going to get a lot of revenue there, but it will provide a sense of space and place for the community. I mean, I really think, especially if we do some neat stuff on the patio area there with the food trucks and maybe cantina lights up in the tree canopy and whatnot, it really is going to provide a neat place for the community to go and have dinner while they're watching a concert, just really enhance that experience. So really that's the goal, is to help offset some of the costs for the concert series, but really just provide a neat experience for the community that we don't currently have.
Thank you, Chris. And Bill, we have a question. With each park structure addition, such as the Big Toy, is the maintenance upkeep included in this plan?
It is. And a lot of what you see on the plan in front of you is replacement of existing surfaces, replacement of existing amenities, and not additional amenities. And so we have evaluated as we move forward, increased maintenance costs in the future years. Right on the front end, as funny as it sounds, it's reduced maintenance costs in some respects, because replacing a play structure, that new play structure needs less maintenance than the one that was there. But we have evaluated and we will be considering that moving forward. But again, most of what you see on this list is not new amenities. It's replacement of existing amenities throughout the park system.
Thank you. And I would like to note that tree work throughout the system has been included in every single year. And while we took a major hit at a couple of our parks, Clyde Creek Park in particular, I shudder to think how bad it would be had not that work already started to take care of trees that were already had a problem.
Absolutely. We actually had some tree work done at Claggett last year that probably lessened some of the impact, although as hard as Claggett was hit, I'm not sure that it really made a huge difference. But I know in some other parks, some of the work we did save some of those trees, yes.
I'll also mention that this fee does, as you notice down in the list of things, it does also cover improvements for the Americans with Disabilities Act that we need to make to the parks based on an Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan that we're currently working on finalizing. We're already doing the work in it, but we haven't finalized it and gotten it fully adopted yet, which is something that we're going to get to you this year. So, but this does include those improvements as well.
And I want to reiterate too, the whole concept of the parks fee was to increase park maintenance. It was not to improve parks specifically or add amenities to the parks. It was to catch up with deferred maintenance. It was to increase the maintenance level in the parks system-wide and take care of things that we just didn't have the money to take care of for a long, long time. So while these are projects, yes, and we call them projects, but again, they're replacement of existing amenities or maintaining at a higher level amenities that already exist throughout the park system.
And Bill, you've been also, and Robert Johnson gets a huge shout out here for the work that he and his crews have done in our parks, getting value out of the dollars that were put in through the fees, but also want to emphasize that because of the efficiencies, the parks are now much more inviting for people, for families to be able to use them. And in 2020, that turned out to be very, very important as people were having to work from home and stay closer to home. The parks were very important. So want to thank you and all of the staff for helping the parks be very important for us last year.
You're welcome, and thank you for the recognition. I appreciate it. I will certainly share that with all the park staff.
Thank you. Great questions. Any other questions on the parks fee and the projects that have gone with that? I'm not seeing any hand raises or seeing anybody unmute. So with that, next page.
So this is just the overview of the Park Service carve-out. I don't really have much to add to it, other than, again, we're just keeping the Park Service fee level. We're seeing a little bit of an increase in the general fund support, and we should be good as far as 25-26 goes, pushed out to that year. So a lot of positives going on with the park system. Moving on to the last piece here as far as financial information goes, we did make some forward progress on some of the projects identified last year at this time. Majority of this is from the CARES Act grant that we received. We're really using a lot of these dollars to improve our ability to telework, work from remote locations, as well as remove some of the paper interaction, be able to distance ourselves from each other while we work. So we're able to do an HRIS software that is currently in process. My IT people are going crazy and my accounting people are going crazy. We've done a lot of major upgrading and we're just exhausted. So when I get to my budget this year, I'm going to say we're doing absolutely nothing next year other than recovering. But we're also adding in live scan for the police department. This is an electronic fingerprint system. Right now we're having to do the ink and paper if we do fingerprints in our police department. And we've also added the Power DMS software. That's going to help the police department remotely track training and accreditation kind of stuff. We're also going to be upgrading full court and municipal court software, first time since 2003. So we're going to the most recent version. This will allow anyone who receives a citation to be able to remotely pay that through the internet instead of having to come into City Hall or call us on the phone. So there'll be a payment portal along with that. We're looking at codification software right now. We're going to be starting a request for proposal process and kick that out the door in the near future. We also upgraded our Springbrook financial software. That's the hub of everything that I do, and everything kind of goes from there. The benefits that we're seeing really are the remote working. I can now log in anywhere to Springbrook and do accounting stuff. So that's good. Along with that, we've added some automated timesheet software that's also in the process of being rolled out. And while not paid with coronavirus CARES Act grant money, we did add a plotter. Our plotter that we had was pretty dysfunctional for many years through some of the personnel cost savings in the environmental public work funds. We were able to add that in this year. So we did make some forward motion on some of these projects. Unfortunately, we're not able to do a whole lot with the staffing just yet. I know those are some high priority, important positions, but we just haven't been able to carve out the ongoing dollars we need to keep them into the future. So this is a positive. I'm going to take this as a win for a lot of these. Is there any?
Sorry, I was muted. We have a question on the pergola.
Yeah, we have pergolas outside of the police department and outside of City Hall, the employee entrance. There's some constructional issues that came with them, so we're seeing some rotting of the posts. So we're going to need to do something about those to either replace the posts and get them better engineered, or possibly just remove them altogether. So that's something, well, not necessarily a high priority. It's something we have to deal with in the near future.
Thank you. I'm glad to see, I've got on my whiteboard here a list of things that we've talked about in terms of the staffing and resources that we need. And when you provide our city staff members who are very skilled with the upgraded in software and other tools, is really going to help them do even more without having to have a whole lot of different spreadsheets and paper and all that stuff that slows them down from doing their best work. So I appreciate the investment there, and I completely understand your IT department of two being very, very tired. It's been one whale of a year. Any questions from any of the folks about the staffing and resources?
I guess the final piece of the night is just kind of a save the date as we look forward to the budget calendar. Tuesday, May 4th will be the first budget meeting, and then that'll be followed with Thursday, May 6th. For the last several years, we've been able to do the budget sessions in 2 periods. However, if we do need a third one, we'll have Monday, the May 10th. I anticipate getting the actual budget documents to all of you folks by April 23rd. That'll give you a week or so to look it over, come up with some good questions. And during that time period, you're also welcome to send your questions to me if you want further clarification or help understanding what the heck we're doing. It can be a lot of information all at once, especially for some of the newer members of the budget committee.
Tim, can we back up one page? I did get a question from Councilor Reed. The ongoing cost of the software, the $70,800, would that be general fund?
It would be probably split 50-50. 50% would hit the general fund and 50 would be spread out through all the different water, street, storm type of funds.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And with that, I'll conclude my piece and stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you all. Are there any other questions that people might have? And of course, feel free to reach out to Mr. Wood, Mr. Epley, Mr. Lawyer, Mr. Pina on questions you may have from tonight's presentation. And since I ran roughshod over the city manager at the beginning because I misheard, I'm going to give him the opportunity for the last word.
Getting late. Everybody have a good night.
All right. Thank you all. The time is 7:50 and we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.